Now we're at question 2 of logical reasoning, drill set number 2. You can see we already have our highlighting tool selected, and we're going to read the question stem first, which reads, Roberta's and Vernon's comments indicate that they disagree about. So I'm going to just highlight Roberta and Vernon and highlight disagree about so that I know exactly what it is we're supposed to do with this little pair of statements from Roberta and Vernon. And remember that anytime you have a conclusion statement, whether it's one speaker or two speakers, you need to highlight that conclusion as part of your process because we're ultimately really evaluating arguments in somewhere between 80 to 90% of the logical reasoning question test. So we're not going to look at the answer choices just yet. We're going to just start by reading Roberta. The recent increase in independently produced films indicates that filmmakers are as tired of the junk turned out by the big studios as audiences are. Clearly, these new films result from a yearning for inventive filmmaking. Well, we can just highlight that final statement from Roberta that clearly indicates, relatively obviously, that this is our conclusion, and we want to focus on that to determine what these two people disagree about ultimately. Next, we move to Vernon. If you had seen any of these independent films, you would know that they are just as poor as studio productions. The trend is merely a search for inexpensive labor. Now that well trained, experienced, unionized film crews are getting paid what they deserve, more filmmakers are using non unionized crews. Far from being better than studio films, independent films add an incompetent crew to the usual list of incompetencies. And we know that the two statements from Roberta and Vernon have to be in concert. They have to be talking about the same subject matter. And we want to consider what the conclusion would be for Vernon. And we recall that we have to find the statement that requires the most support. And while the opening sentence here about what would have happened if Roberta had seen any of these independent films seems kind of conclusive, all of the subsequent information from now to the end of Vernon's paragraph is really in support of the statement that this trend of independently produced films being increased from Roberta is really a search for inexpensive labor. And that's the main conclusion that we want to focus on, that Vernon is most concerned with. So now we need to go into the answer choices and find something that Roberta and Vernon must disagree about based on their two conclusions. So starting with choice A, we keep our highlighted tool selected, and we know that it's not about the quality of studio filmmaking. Vernon seems to say that the studios aren't great, and Roberta ultimately says that they're junk from the big studios. So they agree on choice A, not disagree. Next, we move to choice B, the competence of film crews working on independent films. Well, while this could be a trap because we know that Vernon states that the independent films have incompetent crews, Roberta never says anything about the competence of film crews whatsoever. It's all about what the films themselves end up being in terms of the audience. So we can eliminate choice B for that reason. Next, choice C, whether unionized film crews deserve the pay they receive. Well, unionized film crews is only a concern of Vernon here in the middle of that Vernon paragraph. Roberta has no clear position on union film crews whatsoever, so we can eliminate choice C. Then choice D, whether audiences prefer independent films to studio films. Well, once again, this could be a trap because Roberta is concerned with the audiences, but Vernon is not. So we can't make a statement about whether Vernon would or would not disagree about audiences preferring independent films, as Roberta stated, with any certainty. So we can eliminate choice D. And lastly, choice E, the reason that independent film production is on the rise. Well, hey, this just happens to be the conclusions for each Roberta and Vernon as presented in the paragraphs. Roberta states in the conclusion, these films result from a yearning for inventive filmmaking, whereas Vernon states that these new films are merely a search for inexpensive labor. So this hits directly at how the two conclusions of our speakers are at odds and ends up being the correct answer.